audio.
Okay. I don't know why. Do we know why?
It's fixed now.
Is
Can
it
you
Sorry
fixed?
about
hear
that.
us?
Yeah,
All right, I'm
they
gonna
should be able
start
to hear us
over.
now.
All right, guys, I'm sorry about that. I guess you couldn't hear me, but welcome back to the free Assange online vigil series. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I am joined by my co-hosts Andrew Smith, Christy Doff, and Steve Poikonen. So today is day 3,277 of Julian Assange's unlawful and arbitrary detention in 230 days since his brutal arrest. As for Chelsea Manning, today is day 259 days in jail, and she is now up to $150,000 in fines. So tonight we will be talking about the latest leak to come from WikiLeaks, which exposed an OPCW report related to the Syrian war. We will also be discussing a letter written by 65 doctors to the UK Home Secretary's office, and then later we will also discuss today's event in Berlin and perhaps show you some video clips from that event. We do have a special guest this evening, and I will be introducing him shortly. But before I do get to that, I do want to address the One versus Five Eye campaign and Susie Dawson. So Susie is very happy and relieved that she is not being detained and that she is not going to be deported. She is gratified and extremely thankful for all of the outward support that she has received from you guys. However, this is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. So we can expect more news to come very soon. She needs all of our support, but she is very uplifted that she is able to be at home with her children and spending time with them. And like I said, you could expect to hear more details from her soon. And I'm also going to pass it off to Christy so she can also provide a statement for you all.
Yeah, as the Unity for J spokesperson, I just wanted to say a lot of us know and love Susie from her time at that campaign. She's been a mentor as an activist to a lot of us. We are relieved with her today that she's back home with her kids and she's spending some time with them, and just echoing everything that Taylor said. There will be more details to come, and this will definitely be a marathon, not a sprint. So we're just really, I think all four of us are just really relieved and glad to see her back with her kids today.
Yes, and also everybody, if you are not familiar with the One versus Five Eye campaign, it is all about, of course, one woman, Kiwi journalist and activist Susie Dawson, taking on the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is an interconnected network of intelligence agencies among 5 Western countries, including the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which is Susie's country of origin. This campaign is also about empowering Susie financially to hold these agencies to account in a court of law. And you can do so by donating to the campaign at the number 1, the letters VS, the number 5, the letter I.com/donate. And also do follow the campaign on Twitter at One versus Five Eye. And just also, if you're interested in learning information about these intelligence agencies and how they operate, Susie did hold 10 teach-ins on her YouTube channel, Susie 3D, where she discusses all of that information and goes into great depth. And she had some very special guests join her for several of the episodes. So do check those out because they are very valuable, and it really is information that you will not be finding anywhere else. So do be thinking of Susie, and she is, again, very, very grateful for all of your support. So thank you guys. Now we will switch gears, and I want to introduce you to our guest for this evening. Tonight we are joined by Dario Hunter. Dario is a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education. He is an anti-fracking activist, a rabbi, and former environmental lawyer and educator. Hunter is also a delegate to the GPUS National Committee for Lavender Caucus and chair of the Mahoning County Green Party. So, Dario, thank you so much for joining us. It's really cool to have you on. because of your background, and also because I actually grew up in Youngstown. My family's there, so spent a large part of my life in Youngstown, and I know that it's definitely a town that isn't doing so well economically or financially. So, if you could maybe just go into greater depth about your background and what you're doing to save this community.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. In my role on the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education, I see that as a very important one because to me, education is very much at the center of engagement with our political system. And in many ways, I feel that our city is emblematic of this of the systemic mis and undereducation that is intentional, unfortunately, in this country, intended to keep people disconnected from power, from control. And powerless would be the number one word I would use to describe the feeling, the sentiment, the status of people in a place like Youngstown, where they feel not only a state of economic despair, but they send their children to public schools, which are supposed to provide an adequate education for them to succeed in life, but they are consistently failed by this system. And right now, we're subject to a state takeover that has taken control even away from the elected representatives on the local school board. So the public is expected to pay into the system, but they have no say effectively over the education of their children, over their children's future. And that's the circumstance that we're in right now. But it really is emblematic of the many ways in which people are subject to a system that gives them no say, no choice, no voice. You could extrapolate that further to the issues we have with genocide on our streets against people of color, to the issues that we have in regards to various forms of economic inequality and how people are cut off from just the basic standards of healthy living. In a community like ours on the south side of Youngstown, where I live, not only do we have a dearth of clinics, we don't even have a supermarket in my ward of the city where you can get fresh produce. And so we're talking about basic human rights, basic human quality of life. This is what's at stake. This is the issue. And I see these issues, I face these issues every day on behalf of the people that I represent, the students, the families, and the members of my community.
So I wanna first of all thank you for coming on the show, and then Andrew mentioned before we were live that you were an elected Democrat and you won as a Democrat and switched, left the party and became a Green. And I'd like for you to talk about that. But before that happens, um, the city of, I believe it was Toronto, in order to solve their food desert problem, what they did is they recommissioned and retrofitted city buses into mobile grocery stores. And I've always wanted to launch that as a pilot program in the United States, but I don't have any freaking money. Um, Nor do I have any pull with my city council or anything like that. But I think if someone was already elected saw some merit to that program and threw it out on the table, I think that as a pilot pro, especially if it was partnered with local government or something like that, community funded. Uh, would be incredibly successful and would be a way before everybody grows their own food to at least get fresh food to food desert communities.
Excellent point, and I definitely thank you for focusing on that issue because it is so very elemental, but it's often forgotten how food deserts affect the community, affect communities' abilities to engage, to have a healthy standard of living. Now, here's the thing. We understand this to be a basic human right. It's a basic human right to have access to food, to healthy food. But beyond that, connecting that to how our government, how our system provides that has often proved elusive. Here's the thing, our party supports this right and shows its support through emboldening communities and emboldening concepts like community co-ops. And I think we need to support that. We need to support co-ops in minority communities in particular. We need to provide an investment in that kind of a structure. And we need to support communities mobilizing to make that happen, whether it's through mobile co-ops that provide food, or it's through brick and mortar businesses in communities that are organized and owned by the community. Because in our city, in Youngstown, Ohio, all of the efforts to do this through private businesses, and this is often how they attempt to address the problem. We are going to lure a supermarket company to come here. They've all failed. They've offered all kinds of incentives, of course, with taxpayers' money. They've given it to these companies. They take whatever money's available as long as it's available, and then they leave when they no longer consider it profitable. What we need to do is have the community provide for the community and just embolden and support and provide resources for that to take place. And some communities are doing just that. We need to do that on more of a wider national scale. And as a part of the mobilization under the Green New Deal, there will be support for increased community co-ops. And it's an important feature in providing this cohesiveness, this community connectivity that we'll need in order for the mobilization that needs to take place for us to not only have improved health, but a happier, healthier, stronger planet. Now, to address your first point, when I ran for the school board, I was actually a nonpartisan office. I was a member of the Democratic Party, still technically registered, but in reality, I'd already been fighting the Democratic Party for some time. And this eventually culminated in me suing the party for reasons we won't necessarily get into here. It's a longer story, but our area was a one-party town. Now think about this. I believe everything's connected to everything else. We're talking about how an area has been left to languish as a food desert, how people have been left in a sad and sorry economic state, how education is failing. In this place that is a one-party town, the people who are in charge do not feel the incentive to do right by the people they're supposed to represent. They have been making profit, they've been making money off of people suffering for far too long. And so I'm very proud to be a part of the effort to shake that up. I switched to the Green Party because its values meshed with what I believe. I switched to the Green Party because I looked around me and I saw what was coming out of this one-party cesspool. And whatever is in the Democratic Party's platform, whatever they say is their values, whatever they advance as their values, the reality is what we are getting is a corporate controlled party that is lining the pockets, lining the coffers of corporations at the expense of people's suffering. And the Green Party, not only does it not take corporate money, our platform is oriented towards providing the best solutions that will lead us toward a more equitable, fair system that everyone will participate in. And that's what I strongly believe in. I mentioned that I'm an anti-fracking activist. I've been a part of efforts in our community to get a community bill of rights so that we can ban fracking and transportation of fracking waste in our community. And the same old gang keep beating it down and beating it back. The Democrats and the Republicans combined, because it's the corporate money that's lining their pockets that motivate them to do what they do. Same difference, same garbage coming out of both of them. So I'm very proud to be green and stand up for those values.
So full disclosure, before I get into saying anything, I am a member of the Ohio Green Party State Central Committee. I'm not the most active member in the world, but I just want to put that out there for everyone, just to put that up front. But with you, Dario, I think one of the things that I find most inspiring about you from the time that I first heard you were quitting the Democratic Party to join the Green Party was the fact that you're one of the few people in literally the country in political office that's willing to make that recognition that we live in a one-party state. And by state, I mean country, like a one-party nation. Whether it's a blue candidate or a red candidate, they believe the same thing. Could you go over a little bit some of the different points on your policy platform for us? Because the Greens have a much different way of kind of framing issues, and I think it's really, really important to put those front and center.
Absolutely. My particular platform's policy is to emphasize how the Green Party is the party of justice, justice for the earth and all of its people. People often look at the Green Party, if they're aware of the Green Party, and we want to make more people aware. But if they do look at us, they think of us as a primarily environmentalist party, and some think of us even derisively as tree huggers. And there's nothing wrong with that to me. I love trees. I support the environment. I support protecting the environment. But we are so much more than that. We're about a planet that's not only greener, but fairer. And how do we live those values? Well, for one thing, we support such innovative policies as the Green New Deal, which is going to bring forth 100% renewable energy that we will need, that transition we will need to save this planet, because we know scientists have proven that we have a limited amount of time to turn this man-made climate change crisis around. We must do that. But the added benefit to this is that it will also produce jobs, millions of green jobs, and it will provide the ability for transitioning all the many people who have been out of work to jobs that will help benefit this green revolution. And definitely this is something that will help places like Youngstown, Ohio, that have been hit hard. Now, our campaign also advances something we call the People of Color Bill of Rights, because when we're talking about a new deal for the environment, for the planet, we also have to talk about a new deal for people who've been systematically disenfranchised for centuries. People of Color Bill of Rights addresses the issues that have affected persons of color, such as myself. I'm an African American. It addresses the issues related to justice in our injustice system. When I'm talking about education, I have to mention the school to prison pipeline, the mass incarceration system that has produced profit through people's suffering. I have to mention the fact that we have a broken justice system where people do not have adequate access to justice. They are funneled through, if they're lucky, they're funneled through a broken public defender system where someone will look at their case for no more than 30 seconds and tell an impoverished African-American youth, take whatever plea deal they're going to give you. Just plead guilty and go to jail and sell out your future. These are the unfortunate circumstances that people find themselves in due to this broken justice system. We have inequalities in banking and finance that continue to compound upon the redlining of communities, the racial redlining of communities. We have issues in regards to the sovereignty of our indigenous people, which continues to go disrespected. We have issues in this country in regards to colonialism. The situation with Puerto Rico is dire, and it's compounded, it's caused in effect by the situation of colonialism that this country exerts upon Puerto Rico and all across the world. And so what our campaign is intended to address is the issue of justice for the earth, for a greener earth, but also it's intended to address the inequalities that have been compounded over centuries and centuries under this hyper-capitalist system. We need system change. We can talk about universal healthcare, universal single-payer healthcare, which I believe in, but unless we drill down to what the real issues are that Americans face on an everyday basis, unless we drill down to the fact that that healthcare card isn't going to amount to much if you live in a community that doesn't have an accessible clinic, if you live in a system where doctors treat people of color differently. Studies show that they consider people of color to be capable of taking more pain than other people and prescribe painkillers to them less. When you live under that kind of a racist system, those promises are going to fall short unless you factor into the system change, the massive inequalities and discrimination that occur in this country. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Greens are the party of peace. And our campaign is very upfront about that. We are talking about freeing Assange, and we're talking about the things he's been subjected to for holding a mirror up to this country, holding a mirror up to the world, and all of the things that many countries have been complicit with the US in. We are witnessing a coup in Bolivia. The US has been engaged in all kinds of destabilizing events across the world in order to support this hyper-capitalist system and the profits made by the few. And so our party, our campaign, the Hunter campaign, is focused on ending that, closing all of these bases, investing instead in an infrastructure for peace rather than war, and recognizing, as our campaign recognizes with its innovative Green Path Forward platform focus, that we need to expand things like the Green New Deal to a new geopolitical paradigm in which we stand shoulder to shoulder with the nations of this planet and engage in more fruitful diplomacy to make sure that those countries that are at the top of the carbon emissions list are countries we're working together with friendly diplomatic relations to solve the international climate change problem. And so once again, everything is connected to everything else. We are not going to solve the problems this country faces, this planet faces, unless we strike to the heart of this hyper-capitalist abusive system, put power back into the hands of the people, give communities control, give them the empowerment they need to relieve these issues that we face, and give them a greater sense of engagement that will bridge the gaps created by the democratic deficit in this country.
So, Andrew, you
So
want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to kind of circle back as a way to address all of these issues, you had mentioned earlier about the Community Bill of Rights that the city of Youngstown was working on.
Correct.
And the biggest issue with that, at least in the state of Ohio and with what people face around the country while trying to get community bills of rights passed, is what's called state preemption.
Exactly.
And what that does is it allows the state government to supersede the decision of county and local governments. So the biggest example in the state of Ohio that people have heard of is Nina Turner's success in getting Cuyahoga County, the county I'm currently sitting in, to pass a $15 an hour minimum wage requirement. The state stepped in and said, no, counties aren't allowed to set their own minimum wage requirements. You're not allowed to do that. You're still at $8.25 an hour. So state preemption is a big issue. And to circle it back to the Community Bill of Rights, the city of Oberlin, which I have my disputes with for anyone who watches the vigil regularly, I was fighting with them against the Nexus pipeline, which is a pipeline that affects 256 miles of community through Ohio. Oberlin in particular, I feel like was targeted because it is a community with a Community Bill of Rights. And what the state said is you can vote and you can pass charter amendments, but no laws higher than local levels can affect them. So essentially what they said was that city governments govern only the things that city governments are allowed to govern, and if a state makes a law, it preempts them. And with the Community Bill of Rights, with natural bills of rights, this gets demolished constantly. And so I think it's something really important to emphasize when we're talking about federal government positions, that the goal for things like the Green New Deal shouldn't be to put power to the federal government to make local infrastructure decisions. It should be the opposite. It should be returning power over infrastructure to local communities. And I was just wondering if you could talk about your struggles against state preemption and issues like that.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that's very much the focus and a point, differentiating point for our campaign, that we're very much focused on empowering communities, and we believe that the power should be in the hands of communities. Whether we're talking about policing and creating citizen control boards, I believe in control as opposed to simply oversight. They should control policing. Or we're talking about healthcare, because local areas know the healthcare needs best. If we may have a federal system investing in a national universal healthcare system, but we need control on a community basis. We need input and say on a community basis. And that's how I want to move forward. That's how I'm aiming to move forward in my campaign for president. What I faced in Youngstown has been very informative to this. This effort to get a Community Bill of Rights has been swatted down from every direction. When you're not dealing with the money coming from the oil and gas industry, sending glossy mailers to every home, putting out all kinds of ads, you are dealing with the abuse of the bureaucracy that exists in our state and in our county, Mahoning County, to attempt to beat it back. We had issues with the County Board of Elections not wanting to put it on the ballot. And that's an outgrowth of this issue of state preemption, basically throwing everything but the kitchen sink simply at communities, neighbors, coming together to resolve issues in their community and to show at the ballot box their values, display at the ballot box their values. It is not exclusive to Ohio. You had issues such as this in Oklahoma. It was proven scientifically that Oklahoma's earthquakes were related to the fracking, and then suddenly you had preemption. Communities couldn't ban locally fracking anymore. I've been involved as a plaintiff in suits from CELDEF, suits related to community initiatives that were, in effect, attempts were made to bounce them back, to beat them back by the local board of elections. And this is an ongoing fight to ensure that power remains in the hands of local communities. I think that from a federal perspective, the best thing that I could do, a Hunter administration could do, is to put in place a legislative framework that strengthens the power of communities so that they aren't subject to these kinds of abuses. As someone who's been trained in the legal profession, what I understand is that local governments traditionally have been treated as functionalities, that they've been treated as an arm of the state, a tool of the state, subject to the state's laws. And this kind of a circumstance is what allows for the preemption to take place. You get whatever sphere of powers we're willing to give to you. Ohio supposedly has home rule, but in practice, what does that really mean when local citizens want to put forward an initiative and the state steps in and swats them down? We have to give teeth to the idea of home rule. We have to give teeth to the idea of communities having democratic say and choice and voice over their futures. And as a candidate for president, as someone who aims to be creating a presidential administration when we win, my goal is to be someone who will strengthen that and put the legal framework in place so that local communities will have the level of sovereignty and control they need to be able to see to their affairs, whether it's environmental or free and fair elections initiatives.
So,
And it has to be done by litigation. Like, is litigation the best pathway or only pathway, or like I'm trying to figure that out. Maybe I got lost there along the way.
We shouldn't have to make citizens go through litigation, expensive litigation, which they may or may not have enough legal support or aid to carry out. They're fighting for basic rights. They're fighting over the fact that they've been cut off from direct say in their democracy. What we need is political leaders to stand up and lead the charge of protecting local communities' right to advance their own say over important issues such as the environmental health of their communities. And we need a strong legislative framework that recognizes communities' democratic power and democratic will to say so, to be able to advance those motions. So up until now, we haven't seen that. What we've seen is that municipalities' say-so, local control has been eroded systematically to prevent their citizens' ability to have say over their community's health and welfare.
So I know you know her. She's a superhero in my book, Tish Odell with CELDEF.
Yes, I've worked with her. Yes.
Yeah, out of Ohio here. I was working with her with Nexus, and she's one of the people that really brought municipal independence to like my attention, essentially. And she's been struck down by the state through state preemption over and over and over again. And so right now she's circulating a petition, let me rephrase that, to basically make a preemption to state preemption through a ballot measure using home rule. So I think it's a really, really cool thing that she's trying legally. And that's to get around preemption by essentially saying a ballot measure in a local community would preempt state law. So that's something that's really cool to keep an eye out on as her campaign there grows. And I'm going to try to get her on at some point too.
Absolutely. I think though that, these are measures that we can do in this place and space that we're in, that citizens, that nonprofit groups can advance and move forward with. I think anyone higher up in the power structure needs to use whatever political capital they have to do even more than that. I think we have a responsibility to protect, to ameliorate, to improve the sovereignty, the independence of municipalities. Now, we understand that all of these structures exist under a larger government, under a larger system, but the municipality's independence has been gutted in favor of corporate interest. It has been absolutely gutted. And so we need to present a model that is stronger, more durable, and more protective of communities' rights. And this preemption there has to be a legal framework to completely prevent the ability of states to preempt such basic matters such as the health and welfare of local communities. And Tisha steps in that regard. I think that's a wonderful effort. I think we need to come at it from many different angles, though.
So I know that one of the main platforms of the Green Party, which is pretty much unique to the Green Party, is the outward support for whistleblowers and whistleblowers' rights. And that also relates to journalists as well. So how would a Hunter administration treat Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning?
First of all, I just want to talk about the deplorable circumstances that Julian Assange has been subject to. I want to name them and shame the actors involved. The things he's been subjected to are nothing short of torture. We have to say it because it's not being described necessarily as such in the mainstream media, but it has been described as such by the UN. It has been described as such by multiple sources because he's been subjected to arbitrary detention with the involvement and engagement of multiple nations, many water carriers on behalf of this government, this US government effort. And Chelsea Manning as well, of course, has been subjected to all manner of inhuman treatment. And we have to acknowledge the fact that this is an international effort motivated by the United States in a way that deprives the basic human rights related to journalistic freedom. That's what we are talking about here. Many defamatory things have been said about Assange, that he's a hacker, all sorts of things. He's a publisher, he's a journalist, he's a whistleblower, he's a hero. The information that he's made available is information that has lifted the veil for many people on all of the nefarious things being done by governments. It's necessary. It is a necessary part of human freedom to be able to have freedom of the press. And all of the things that have been done to him, that he's suffered through, have been done in order to squash that. So
what would you do would you pardon Julian Assange?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not no brainer. No brainer. And more than that, it's, to me, the question strikes me as that's the least that you can do because so much more needs to take place. Yes, pardon, of course. But then you need to dig into all of the things that have been done to him, who's been involved in them, and you need to hold the people involved responsible. The things that have been done to him are criminal. So we would move from pardoning to dealing with the criminal prosecution of who is involved in the torture of this man and the deprivation of this man from his rights in so many ways. One of the things that stands out to me that was so galling that isn't even really talked about as much as it should be in some free Assange circles is the fact that he was a citizen of Ecuador. He was extended citizenship, and they yanked that citizenship back and then left him prey to all of these bodies subjecting him to torture motivated by the US. Well, that is a complete violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15. Everyone has a right to a nationality, but also they have a right to not be arbitrarily deprived of it. And to me, that's one of the many ways in which it just shows all of the things that this system, this international system, this international cabal is willing to do in order to ensure that it gets its way and that it keeps these secrets under wrap, these dangerous secrets under wrap. Now, if you don't—
So one of our, and I like this comment here, I want to read it, is from one of our dedicated viewers, Propaganda Quinn. He says, this man, you, Dario, just raised the bar for politicians on Julian Assange.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much for that comment.
Dario, I want to ask you what to you will happen if Julian Assange is extradited to the United States and he is put on trial here. What do you foresee happening, not only to him and his person, but to American citizens and free speech and free press, if that is allowed to happen?
First of all, it would be a show trial. This is all just, it's a mockery of anything intended to resemble justice. The charges against him are, I would say they'd be laughable if what he's facing isn't so lamentably serious. He's been charged under charges related to the Espionage Act of 1917. There's a possible maximum sentence looming of 170 years. It's worth noting that under the Obama administration, which, by the way, I'm dropping his name not appreciatively because he's got a lot of blood on his hands from the drone war they engaged in, but I'm just going to mention this, that they decided against these kinds of charges because they thought of the negative effect that would have on investigative journalism, and of course the possibility that it would be unconstitutional. But in effect, here they go, full steam ahead with these charges, and it's based on the fact that he's obtained and he's published these secret documents, but that process, what he did, isn't all that different from what other news organizations have done. In fact, the New York Times commented that they've obtained the same documents as WikiLeaks has under these circumstances, and also without government authorization, these classified documents. They are scapegoating this man. They're scapegoating this man and subjecting him to all kinds of treatment, which is not justice. It's extrajudicial. This trial would be purely a show trial, and I repudiate every aspect of it. And any right-thinking person, any political leader needs to do the same.
So a couple of things to touch on there. The Obama administration was talked out of going through trying to press charges and extradite Julian Assange.
Yep.
They wanted to go forward. They literally called it the New York Times problem.
Yep.
But they had a secret warrant for him already written up, which we know now.
We know now, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion.
It's what the Trump administration based their extradition charges off of, because they could reach into the desk drawer and there was already
Right. They just basically picked up where the Obama administration left off.
But you got those charges, the espionage charges on the 23rd of May, added to what was basically minor charges to start with. Conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. You're talking about something that carries about a maximum 5-year sentence. For this,
Right.
all of that.
Real quick though, what we also know is that there is a U.S. legal precedent set for WikiLeaks just over the summer by the dismissal with prejudice of a lawsuit filed by the DNC against Julian Assange personally. WikiLeaks is an organization, the Russian Federation, a bunch of the hackers or whatever that were named in the, not hackers, but mean people, Cambridge Analytica people from the Mueller report. The DNC sued everybody. And this judge, Kettle, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, and then in his dismissal noted that WikiLeaks deserves the same protections afforded as the outlets that published the Panama Papers, specifically cited the Panama Papers. So
Absolutely.
there is a current U.S. legal precedent for WikiLeaks having the same protections. It's not theoretical anymore. It's not up for debate. It exists. So and I think anytime that we're discussing, the possible eventuality of Julian Assange being extradited, it's important to bring that up. Like they've already tried that. DNC tried that and got dismissed.
Yeah, and here's the thing about the Obama administration. We all know that they were quite capable of engaging in all kinds of extrajudicial activities as well, things that really flew in the face of basic human rights all over the world. This one, they were called back from the brink on. This was a bit too far for those Espionage Act charges, but of course, nothing's too far for the Trump administration. I'm talking about an administration that's got children in cages at the border. They absolutely know no bounds. And so it's worth noting that this bridge too far for the Obama administration, Trump is completely willing to go there. And the chilling effect that this is all going to have on the journalistic profession, an international chilling effect. And I need to underline this because, yes, this is something US motivated, but it is involving many nations. Let's go down the quick and dirty list of the nations that are involved. Besides Ecuador being the water carrier for the US on this, you got Sweden with the trumped up case that they had, a case that, you know, Stockholm's senior prosecutor, Eva Finn, called, you know, a situation that disclosed no crime at all, but it moved forward. It continued to lurch forward. They even brought it back after he was dragged out of the embassy, only to drop it some months later in November, regarding an inability to produce enough evidence after the passage of time. Nonsense, garbage. So many nations' judicial systems were perverted to exert this pressure and this effort on this man because of the leaks, the very important information that was publicly disseminated out of WikiLeaks, but was so dangerous to an international power structure with US powerful people at its root. So we really, as a nation, as a planet, need to be concerned, deeply concerned about what's happening to this individual, not just because he's a human being, but what it represents for the chilling effect upon human rights, upon information being freely shared and available, upon journalistic freedom. It is going to be chillingly precedent setting if they're allowed to do what they're aiming to do to this man.
So, you know, we've talked a lot about, we've never really had an attorney on before to discuss the legal aspects of this case. I know you're not an international, like human rights attorney and that you've practiced in environmental law. But can you speak to, at least to the extent in which you feel comfortable, maybe through a legal perspective of the violations, the international human rights violations that have been happening with this case, and these sorts of disregards for the law that we've seen happen repeatedly with the Assange case? Is that grounds to completely throw out this case in a court of law?
Well, frankly, I just don't feel, and this is my personal opinion, it's not offered as legal advice, but I just personally feel the case just doesn't have a leg to stand on. I mean, if you're advancing the idea that this case does have legal merit, then what you are advancing is an idea that flies in the face of a large body of jurisprudence on journalistic freedom that has existed for generations upon generations. You are advancing something that attempts to overturn what we know, the legal wisdom on freedom of the press, reaching all the way back to the founding of the Republic. And I think many people involved in this persecution effort against Assange understand this, which is why if you listen carefully to the language that they use against him, they're very quick and they're very careful to say, he's no journalist. It's a framing exercise. If they can get you to come out of this box of thinking that they are attacking journalistic freedom and simply say he's not a journalist, he's a hacker. You've heard the water carriers in this new Ecuadorian administration say the same thing. Lena Moreno has said he's just a hacker. These are things designed to say, don't look behind the curtain. We are not assassinating freedom of the press in how we're treating this man. We're just dealing with someone who is just a hacker. The connotation of that is intended to draw attention away from what they're really doing, which is, in effect, cutting off the legs of freedom of the press. I don't think this has a leg to stand on. If we weren't under this current oppressive situation that we have in the United States and in the way that the press, the freedom of the press has just been attacked from all sides, it wouldn't fly, we wouldn't be advancing this, but here we are. And so it's important for Americans of all stripes, of all backgrounds, to raise their concerns, to protest, to fight for the freedom of the press that's being endangered in this case. Because yes, it is a human being whose life is at issue, but it's so much larger than this one man. They really want to overturn all of what we know about freedom of the press through this case.
So one thing too that I want to talk about, because we brought it up a couple times, is the situation with Ecuador and what was going on there, and kind of where we left off here in the visual talking about it. Um, so I really appreciate, first of all, your language and how you actually frame it, because it was more than just having asylum removed. It was the removal of his citizenship.
Yeah.
And to get Ecuador to do so, the US pressured the International Monetary Fund, who's currently headed by a former Pepsi executive, if I remember correctly, to write a multi-billion-dollar loan to the nation of Ecuador, which forced them to impose austerity measures against their population to pay back that debt, which then led to a civil uprising against them for said austerity measures.
Yep.
So the situation with Julian and everything that is around it is so, I don't know, intense, because even just the decision to traffic him for $4 billion from one part of London to the other led to a literal organized revolution in the street in the country of Ecuador because of the massive political and economic burden that got pushed upon the people for their leader to even be able to sell him, so to speak. So just
Yeah.
that entire situation's crazy to me. And I really appreciate you putting it such a way. And I think that that's what I hope more people can do when they talk about him.
Oh yeah, no, they sold him. They sold him out. I want to say was, but frankly, I'm just going to say he is. He's a citizen. He's a citizen of that country who was sold out. It's just unconscionable how they did that. But even before they got to that step, we know that the circumstances in which he was in that embassy and increasingly turned into what was solitary confinement. So before they got to that step, things got really ugly. You know, the General Counsel for Human Rights Watch called the refusal to allow people to have access to Assange and all the other conditions that were eventually imposed upon him because of the pressure that was imposed upon Ecuador. They called it something that looked more and more like solitary confinement. So Ecuador was also complicit, involved in, and engaged in the torture of this man before they stripped him summarily, with what looks like without due process, of his citizenship. This should be something alone that people should be up in arms about.
So just to kind of circle back to policy, because I really like the idea of municipal revolution essentially as a solution to our current political climate. Um, do you think that there would be any possibility to get cities on board with municipal disobedience, essentially using their municipal police force as their legal monopoly on violence against state authorities that would want to step in to preempt them, such as a pipeline fight getting local police to physically detain and stop the construction because it is a violation of liberty within that city?
Mhm. I don't see that happening in and of itself.